Recording here. Hello, my name is Will Hull, and this is South Dakota Unit 2 for Division D for the We the People Nationals hearings. In a moment, I'll have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we will begin the hearing. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge follow-up questions. My microphone will be muted during this session. However, I will be the person holding up the 1 minute as well as the time sign so that you can know when those periods have passed during the hearing. For those of you that are controlling the Zoom here, up in the very top right-hand corner, there's a little view icon. If you click on that, you can set it to a gallery view so that you can ensure that you see those cards. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will give some brief feedback, and then we'll conclude the hearing overall. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone over to our judging panel where they can introduce themselves.
Okay, welcome South Dakota. Congratulations for being here. My name is Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota. Let me turn things over now to Judge Dunlap.
Hello there, good to see you all. I am president and CEO of the Indiana Bar Foundation in my day job and located here in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Good afternoon and congratulations for being here. My name is Tim Igo. I am a writer, lawyer, and magazine editor, and I work at the State Bar of Arizona in Phoenix.
So maybe now you could introduce yourselves.
I'm Samantha Walters.
I'm Brandon Henderson.
I'm Kylie Stalder.
I'm Will Saylor, and we're here with our instructor, Mr. Patrick Gainey.
Okay, fantastic. So I will read the question, Unit 2, Question 2, after which the floor will be yours. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders, and what alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? The floor is yours. You may begin.
This famous excerpt from James Madison's Federalist 10 paper highlights a common contention point regarding delegates versus trustees, a republic versus a democracy. The highly esteemed publication also covered the question of how to reconcile citizens with the interests contrary to the rights of others or to the interests of the entire community. Madison noted that a republic is different from a democracy in the sense that its government is given to the hands of the delegates. Therefore, it can rule over a larger area. One main reason Madison advocated for a republic was that it allows for more representation over the minority, opposed to that offered by a direct democracy. Those elected to the House were tasked with representing the public, typically following either a trustee or a delegate system. Adopting a trustee mindset allows for the representative to make decisions that reflect the best interests of the citizens. By contrast, a delegate-leaning mindset encourages representatives to reflect the majority stances on political matters. To further argue that republics are superior to democracies, Madison notes that a democracy is unable to prevent violence of factions, furthering his belief that a strong central government would unify the country and promote its prosperity.
While I personally agree with Madison's argument for the proposed Republican government and trustee system, the opposing points of view have their own merits that cannot be discounted, and other members of our group have different opinions. While we largely agree with Madison's claims that a republic with a trustee system of representation would be more efficient at discerning and refining the views of their constituents, we can also see the problems that can arise when such a system is applied to a large, expansive state. These problems are well displayed by John Trenchard in Cato 3, wherein he discusses the injustices made possible by a republic ruling over such a large territory, quoting Montesquieu saying, quote, "To a republic to have only a small territory, otherwise it cannot subsist," unquote, because a large territory leads to more disconnect between its representatives and their constituents and a decreasing reliability from a trustee system. Conversely, Madison's worries regarding a delegate system are valid, saying in Federalist 10 that no man is allowed to be a judge in his own cause because it would certainly bias his judgment, unquote. Madison is clearly worried about the conflicts of interest that could arise in the delegate system. The levels of disagreement on this issue led the founders to compromise on the democratic republic that remains in the U.S. today without a well-defined delegate or trustee system.
While the direct alternatives to the existing system are certainly worthy of consideration, the founders' main debate actually focused around whether the representation was more national or local. Those who would become Federalists pointed out that a more powerful national government would impact the lives of people in every state, and thus supported the system in the Virginia Plan, which offered proportional representation to the states. While proportional representation may indeed have been more beneficial to the overall populace, Delaware Gunning Bedford Jr. famously threatened, quote, "The small states would find some foreign ally of more honor and good faith, who will take them by hand and do them justice." End quote. The Connecticut Compromise solved this problem by making one of the houses in the bicameral legislature proportional and the other equal. Another major consideration was term limits. Proponents of the legislative term limits wanted representatives to return home and see the real-world impacts of their legislation. They also thought that this might prevent corruption by preventing people from becoming career politicians. This was eventually refused as the founders decided that politicians would be unfaithful during their final terms.
While the principles of representative government, which we've discussed today, still hold true, it's important to realize that our current constitutional republic was established well over 200 years ago and hasn't changed nearly as much as its country. The House of Representatives consistently expanded with the expanding population until 1911. In fact, Madison originally proposed an amendment that would tie the size of the House to the population. We could still pass such an amendment to follow in the footsteps of other first world countries like Denmark and have a number of representatives equal to the cube root of the population. Another problem in the status quo is the fact that all of our representative districts select only one victor. This fact permits gerrymandering when districts are drawn within large states. Ohio's 9th District, for example, was described by a panel of federal judges in Cincinnati as, quote, a bizarre elongated sliver of a district that severs numerous counties, unquote. Also, a single transferable vote or STV system allows for less polarized elections as relatively popular centrist candidates can acquire a substantial amount of secondary votes. These measures can help make the legislature a better representation of the people and depolarize legislative politics.
We are now ready to answer any questions you may have.
Perfect timing. Well done. We will open up with Q&A and I'll lead things off. I want to take us back to the American constitutional debate and the anti-federalists, who you know were very critical of the Constitution, including the mode of representation that Madison seems to be supporting, that trustee model. The anti-federalists more likely to favor the delegate model, and they also pushed for term limits and rotating representatives. What do you think about this debate? Were the anti-federalists on to something, or would you disagree with them and certainly explain your answer?
Well, as I mentioned in my part of our prepared speech, both sides of the argument have valid points. Both the delegate and trustee model, they both have their pros and cons. Personally, I think I would agree more with the trustee model because of the size of the country that this system is being applied to. I feel like it's more efficient, and if you have a delegate model where they're trying to be very, very true to what their constituents want, with such a large territory, it could be very inefficient, and it could lead to a worsening of the zero-sum politics that we already see quite a bit with the largely trustee model that we have currently. But the delegate model as well, it could be the delegate model could be better about not leading to any sorts of like tyranny or the representatives being unfaithful to their constituents.
I personally disagree with Brandon's statement. I am more with the delegate system myself, just because being in a smaller state of South Dakota, it is hard to get both sides of each story. And I think that this would lead to a trustee system, maybe possibly having a representative like be from a certain area and more or less choose their views over what would be best for the overall populace of what the people want.
To reiterate on both Brandon and Kylie's statements, I personally believe that having both a delegate and a trustee system in place is necessary for maintaining the best interests of our citizens, but also making sure that their voices are heard, which is protected under our First Amendment.
And what about the question of term limits?
So I think that term limits are a really valuable idea, and it's obviously a good thing that we have them for the president. And I think that they would be beneficial for lower level people like representatives and senators as well, because we've seen a lot of people in our government currently become career politicians. And many of these politicians very rarely actually return home to their own states. And so, as my colleague Kylie said, there's just this disconnect between the representatives and the people whom they're meant to represent.
Thank you.
So just to kind of follow up with that, do you think that there is a role for direct democracy? And I know, many Western states have referenda and various sort of direct democracy aspects. You're talking about the disconnect between sometimes elected officials and their constituents. Is there a role, or is it a good idea to remove that in some circumstances and have a direct democracy function within either state or local or even national government?
I think there's definitely a role for direct democracy. Madison, as I mentioned in my speech, feared that direct democracy would not offer as much representation to the minorities. So while we are a democratic republic, we stand true in our reasoning that a republic is the best system to cover our large population of a country. However, the aspects of a direct democracy are definitely necessary when it comes to representing our constituents.
To build on that, I would say that I really enjoy the way that direct democracy is implemented in states like our own, in that the legislature can be a more efficient small group of people who are sufficiently educated to write good bills. But then rather than going through the gridlock of Congress that we especially see in federal politics, we can actually just see the people choose what they think is best for themselves.
Do you think that version should be expanded to the national level, or is there a size difference that doesn't translate?
I mean, I would say that federal laws impact everybody as it stands. And currently people from particularly large states don't have a lot of say in what goes on in the Senate. And so trying to move that decision out to the people would definitely yield better results for the overall population. But states like our own might not support that, seeing as we would lose power in that system.
And I do feel like if these types of systems were applied to the federal level, this could help to alleviate a little bit of the spoiler effect you see due to the first past the post system we have with our federal elections. I feel like it could give the minority political view in each state. I feel like it could give them the feeling that they have a little bit more say in their government than they do currently with the spoiler effect we see with our first past the post system. If we were not to go to a full single transferable vote system for our national elections.
Thank you.
Would you say that our current U.S. House of Representatives, the one created by the founders, is simply too small to accurately reflect the views of the American people? Would you increase it substantially?
That's exactly what I would do. As I talked about earlier in my speech, I think that the size of the House should be tied to the population. So a lot of other countries, as I mentioned, Denmark, which has 179 representatives for its 5.8 million population, have a number of people in the lower house that very, very closely reflect the cube root of the population. And this is exactly what happened in the United States until we simply stopped expanding the House. And now we have a massive country that's very diverse in a number of ways, especially politically. And having such a small House really doesn't cut it.
And your colleagues may want to speak to this too, but I am curious, if it were increased, would you have any other safeguards to not just get more of the same kind of people, but would there be any kind of rubric established to maybe find ways that groups that are maybe currently niche parties would actually have a foothold?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that statement. Going back to Denmark, as we mentioned in our proposition of using or taking the cubed root of the population when taking into consideration how many people are in our House of Representatives, I think that Denmark does have laws in place that allow for a majority of their House of Representatives to be made up of women. I think the number they have is 47% of their politicians are women, whereas in the United States, we have about a 26% female politician rate. So putting these types of rubrics into place regarding race or perhaps gender, I think these are definitely factors that we could take into consideration when it comes to expanding the amount of representatives that we have in the House.
While I personally agree with that as well, I would also like to make sure that with this rubric, we are not just throwing in people who don't necessarily know or represent their people in the best way possible just because we have to have a certain race, gender, or stuff like that.
And you were talking about niche political beliefs. And so with
Yes.
single transfer,
I'll have to stop you right there. Thank you very much. Well done.
Right. Very nice job, South Dakota. We are now going to just offer some constructive criticism. I thought your opening remarks were excellent. I could tell you put a lot of work into that. It was very polished. I felt like the team worked together. You often complimented one another with the things you said or supplemented the things that somebody may have left out, but there was also some internal disagreement. And I like that. I like seeing that. It shows critical thinking. Maybe just, I don't know if this is criticism or just something to think about with your wanting to increase the size of the House of Representatives. If it gets too big, does it become impossible for a real dialogue or debate to occur there? Does that break down? It's probably already broken down. Is it going to break down even more if that thing gets larger? Just something to think about. But overall, very nice job, South Dakota.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation very much. I thought it was deep and well thought out. Just to jump to the last thing that Judge Drummond mentioned and that we discussed at the end, widening or broadening the number of members in the House is an interesting question. And the reaction you had is not an uncommon one, which is, well, if we do that, we have to ensure that we are getting people with ability and knowledge to do the work, which is true. Although I'd point out that we don't currently do that now, right? So, we would want to be careful about broadening it to allow a diverse population to come in and have new views. And all of a sudden, we're hypersensitive to whether they have knowledge and abilities. Currently, we have no idea if they have knowledge or abilities. So I would just throw that out there. And then it's interesting, the vocabulary of talking about whether somebody is unfaithful to their constituents. And I agree that that's an interesting way to look at it. And between the model of the trustee or delegate model, and what does it mean to be unfaithful to your constituents? I sometimes wonder, and I've never been an elected official, where I would stand on the question of where I feel like I have to abide by what I believe is the morally right thing to do, or do I abide by the largest and loudest voices in my state? I always like to think I would do the moral and right thing, but that's not exactly what all our founders believe they should be doing. So, but an excellent conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just again continue on for my two colleagues. It was a great job, and one of the things that has already been mentioned that I thought was particularly noteworthy was how well you did work together. It was great participation. It was a great team effort, and it was very sort of a lot of in-depth analysis. So it obviously shows the work that you put in over the course of this semester with each other, and I'm sure other units as well, exchanging information and ideas. And that's one of the things that I love about the program too, is you might be working on your unit, but you can also refer to your colleagues in other units as well, some of the things that they're working on that might be relevant to your topics. And this idea of representation, there's so much there, and it's so tricky. We didn't even talk about sort of, voting access and voting things that are happening today, and what roles states versus federal. I mean, there's some great federalism debates and things along those lines too. But yet there are still direct democracy aspects within our national and state governments, and that's an interesting thing. Maybe more so for you. We have very few in Indiana. There are very few referenda and things like that, but other states, and maybe yours is one, have quite a few. And what does that translate to when there is no filter? Is that better? Is that worse? Are there other things that occur because of that? And so that was an interesting aspect that I thought you had a lot of good perspectives on. Again, well done. I really enjoyed the conversation, and you should be very proud of yourself. And I'm sure your teacher is, and your parents are, and everybody else that you've been talking to this semester. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was going to mention to Judge Dunlap's point, in Arizona, I think, and you're absolutely right, the Western states are different. I think we've amended our Constitution almost 160 times. And it's like, is it a constitution or is it a shopping list? But people feel very strongly about it. And guess who doesn't like that? The legislature. So, thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps up South Dakota Unit 2 from Division D. At this time, I'll invite the students to say thanks if they want to say thanks.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for your time.
Great job.